Hey guys, welcome to this video, and today's question is about the pros and cons of living in Australia. So in this question, the viewer asks us what are the pros and cons of living in Australia. So I'm going to list out 5 pros and 5 cons that I can kind of think of since I moved here. So let's get straight into it. So the number one pro of like living in Australia is that it's really a pollution-free place to live in, and it's really clean. So like the reason I moved to Australia, one of the reasons was that it's a really clean place. So luckily I had a chance to visit Australia a few years before I moved here. So I remember when I first moved here, I was in Sydney, and I was doing like a ferry ride from the main Sydney harbour to the other side of North Sydney. And as I was doing that trip, I remember looking at the water as I reached the harbour, and I was looking into the water, and it was about like 4 feet deep. That was the distance from like the water till the bottom of the water, and I could see the bottom of the harbour. I can see the bottom of like the seabed, even though it was like 4 feet of water in between it, right? And it was crystal clear blue water, and I remember thinking to myself, this is awesome, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to like get to this country and make sure that I live here. So that was a big motivation for me, having that pollution free environment. And once I got here, it was still a pollution-free environment, and luckily it is. It's generally pretty clean out here. There's not too much air pollution. In Australia, it's one of the most cleanest places that you can live in terms of pollution. So yeah, having a good environment, pollution-free environment, is a number one pro of living in Australia. Number 2 is that Australia has relatively good infrastructure and systems. So just about anything, Australia is like a developed nation, and most of the things that other countries may not necessarily have are in place in Australia. So an example would be roads. So roads are pretty well developed in Australia, and you have high quality of roads without too many like potholes, or just like it's very well maintained in terms of the roads, and even public transport, in my opinion, is like really great out here in Australia for the most part. And related to the infrastructure, just to give you an example, so when you go out to a beach out here in Australia, it has everything that you would need, right? So take for example a beach such as like Bondi Beach or Bronte Beach, which is in Sydney. So when you go to the beach, you'll have like parking slots to park your car. You'll have picnic spots in case you want to have a picnic, not at the beach but somewhere further than the beach. You'll have picnic spots. You might even have barbecues if you want to have a barbecue and do some cooking over there. You have that as well. You'll have toilets, you'll have drinking water, you'll have showers where you can change after you've gone to the beach. So basically you have all those things set up for you to ensure that you have a good time and you enjoy your day out when you do decide to go to the beach or any other place for that matter. It just has those good infrastructures in place. Even this beautiful parkway I'm in, it's like well lit up during the night time. Everything is like pretty well maintained and well kept, and that's like one of the pros of living out here in Australia, is that you'll get to enjoy some of those aspects of Australia as well. So that was number 2, having good infrastructure and systems in general. Number 3 is that it's a really beautiful country. So I'm out here in Hyde Park right now. It's a beautiful park right in the middle of the city, of the city. And apart from this, you also have like nature walks. You have coastal walks in Sydney. You have beautiful beaches. The environment in general is really good and clean, and they're like, you can literally spend your whole life exploring Australia because it's such a big country and there's so many beautiful spots to visit. So it's a really beautiful country, and yeah, that's another pro of living in Australia, is that you get to enjoy the natural beauty of the place, and hopefully you do that once you're here. The number 4 benefit or the pro of visiting in Australia is that it's a very multicultural place. So you have people from all sorts of all parts of the world coming out here and starting over their lives. And I think that's what makes Australia really unique and a fun place to live in. So literally Australia is a country full of migrants, right? So right up from 200 years back, when people first started coming in from the UK and that part of Europe, and you had like people migrating from all around the world over subsequent generation and years, and Australia has really turned into this place where you have people from all around the world coming and moving here and making it a really good place. And I think that's what makes Australia so great, is that you have people from all these different parts of the world coming here and all adding their own unique spice and flavor to the place, and it makes it a really good place to live in. You get to experience different cultures. You can go to like different restaurants out here, taste foods from all over the world, just because you have people from all different parts of the world coming out here and bringing the best that they have to offer from their countries, which is what is another benefit of living in Australia. So that was number 4. So number 5 is that Australia has a very high standard of living compared to the rest of the world. I think it has it ranks in the top 10 of the per capita income for people around the world. So it's a relatively it's a developed nation, and you have people on average making more money compared to the rest of the world, and you get to enjoy a better standard of living in terms of your choices of food, and even like things around the house. Things are generally of like better quality out here compared to most parts of the world, or at least developing nations. Australia is relatively higher up the scale in terms of quality of life. Yeah, so those are like the top 5 pros. Now we're getting into the cons of moving to Australia. So the most important thing that most people think of, most people complain about, is that Australia is really expensive, and I agree, it is expensive. So number one, like food and rent out here is very expensive. So if you're going out to a good restaurant in Australia, or at least in Sydney, and you want to have like a really good fancy meal, maybe with your significant other, it's going to cost you a lot to do so. And going out on a regular basis in Australia can get really expensive. So if you're a person who likes to go out every weekend, it may be expensive for you to do it on a regular basis, and you're going to find it challenging. Again, it depends on how much money you make and other factors as well, but in general, going out is expensive out here. Rent is really expensive, so you're going to spend, at least if you're in, say, a city like Sydney, and if you're staying anywhere close to the main city, rent can get expensive. I understand that in other cities such as Melbourne and Brisbane, it can be slightly lower than what it is in Sydney, but in general, renting out a place in Australia can take up a significant part of your income goes to rent. So yeah, rent is expensive out here. Number 3, oh, I don't know what number we are on, but number 2, I'm going to keep going. Number 2 is that manual work is expensive. Again, related to expenses, like manual work is expensive. So if you're looking to do any sort of odd job such as plumbing, or maybe some carpentry work, or any sort of work that requires like manual labor, is cheaper out here. I remember that I broke a drawer cabinet in the current rental place that I'm living in, and I just pulled out a drawer and it fell to the floor and it cracked into pieces. So I needed to get that drawer fixed, and I couldn't do it myself, so I hired someone from this site called Atasker, where you can hire professionals to do small tasks. So I hired a carpenter out there, and he came and fixed my drawer, and it cost me around like $100 just to fix a drawer, and he took like tops half an hour to get that job done. And if I were to do that same job back in India, to hire a carpenter, it would have cost me like maybe at the max like $4 to get that same drawer fixed. So $4 versus $80, that's a huge difference. So labor is expensive out here in Australia, and yeah, that's something that you might find an issue as well once you move here. So we talked about expenses and how things are expensive. So again, all these points are all relative to the amount of money that you make. So if you have a very high-paying job and you're making a lot of money, then probably these things won't matter to you as much. But if you're someone who's not making a money and maybe doesn't have a high-paying job, then all these things could be a factor to you, and you might start feeling the pinch. So that things in Australia are expensive, but in general, people also make like a lot of money as well. So the standard of living out here is higher compared to the rest of the world, like I talked about earlier. So it may not be such a huge factor in the long run. All right, so that was some cons about living in Australia. One more con that I can think about is that it does take time to integrate. So once you move here for the first time, like you're literally starting a new life, and it can take time to learn new things, such as how do I get my driver's license, how do I get a Medicare card. You basically need to start over from scratch, especially if you're watching this video and you're thinking of moving here or you're moving here soon. So all those things are like, it does take time to get used to. And it's not just figuring out that stuff, is also like getting integrating into the culture in general and learning the local language or slangs. So there are many things that are unique to Australia that are not the words that are unique to Australia that are not used anywhere else in the world. So if, for example, I remember when I first got here, I was having this conversation with a group of people that I just met, and they were talking about pokies. So they're talking about how they went to this bar and like people are always into pokies. And I remember like standing in that conversation, listening to them, and I didn't know what pokies meant. So I literally had to like go back home, go into Google, search what the pokies mean, and I found out that pokies is basically those slot machines that they have at some bars out here, bars and pubs out here. So it's a place where people go and you pull those slot machines, and it's basically a form of gambling. So and a lot of people in Australia are into that, or not a lot, but there are a few people that are into pokies and use those slot machines. So I didn't know what the conversation was about, because I haven't heard that topic before. And you're going to find yourself in similar situations as well, where when you first get here, you're not going to follow some of the conversations because you don't know what the hell the people are talking about, because they have their own language for certain things, right? So that's just something that you need to get used to. Is a con of moving to Australia, is that you need to get used to those new slangs and new words, but once you start living here for a while, you should be all right. So yeah, those were some of the pros and cons of living in Australia. I hope this video helped. If you have any more questions, drop me a comment and I'll try answering them. Hit the like button and share this with anyone who you think might find this useful. And I'll see you guys in the next video.